Good evening and welcome to this special edition of MetroFocus. I'm Jack Ford. The last 2 weeks of 2019 saw at least 14 reported anti-Semitic assaults in the New York metro area. One of the most recent acts of violence happened right outside of the city in Muncie, New York, where a Hanukkah celebration at a rabbi's home was interrupted by a machete attack. With the community traumatized, the rabbi who survived the attack had this unifying message.
I will never forget the horror of that night, but I will also never forget how we continue to celebrate after the attack, how we continue to rejoice in the miracle of Hanukkah. I will never forget the resilience on display that night and in the following days, the resilience of Jewish people and the resilience of New York.
The suspect, 38-year-old Grafton Thomas, was arrested in Harlem after police tracked his license plate. Amidst the violence, NYPD Commissioner Dermot Shea made a surprising announcement.
We've just ended a year in which we saw fewer overall index crimes than the previous year's record-setting lows. But as is always the case in our profession, there are areas of concern as well. Murders, shootings, and robberies all saw upticks. Hate crimes are also up, specifically driven by anti-Semitism.
So why has there been a spree of anti-Semitic violence? And how do we stop this cycle of hate? Well, here to help us with some of the answers, hopefully, are Rabbi Mark Wilds, founder and director of the Manhattan Jewish Experience, Dr. Gail Saltz, clinical associate professor of psychiatry at New York Presbyterian Hospital and psychoanalyst at the New York Psychoanalytic Institute, and Mohammed Khan, director of communications for the Muslim Community Patrol, a civilian organization working to protect local communities from hate crimes. So welcome to all of you. We have a lot to talk about. I want to focus first on history and causes, and then we're going to get into ideas of solutions and remedies. But let's start at the beginning, which is probably a good place to start in any conversation, and that is the history of anti-Semitism. Mark, I'll ask you first. I suspect, and I know you do a lot of work with younger people, I suspect that if we ask younger people and ask about the history of anti-Semitism, their sort of institutional memory might not go back farther than the notion of the Holocaust. But as we know, anti-Semitism goes back much farther. Give us a little sense of the history.
Yeah, I wish it was as recent as the Holocaust. But anti-Semitism began as Judaism began. The first Jew, Abraham, was referred to as a Hebrew, from the Hebrew word ivri, which means aver on the other side. He was looked at as different and as other. And it wasn't too long that the ancient Israelites were enslaved by the Egyptians, and then the Assyrians and the Babylonians and the Persians and the Romans. There have been so many periods and epochs of anti-Semitism leading up and culminating perhaps in the Holocaust.
Why do we think today, all right, and Gail, I'll ask you this first, and then Mohammed asks you to get in on it also. Why do we think today we are seeing this? You can almost characterize it as an explosion of anti-Semitic activity. Do we think it's merely more reporting of it, or do we think there's more incidents taking place? And what is it about this era, do you think?
There do seem to be more incidents, and I think the reason we're seeing it now is if you look at social psychology and the data that's been understood and reported over a long period of history, but what's occurring now is you have a group that is, as you brought up, sort of the out group, right, seen as different, but moreover, they've been historically seen as a socioeconomically competent group. And when you look at prejudice, which occurs, you know, I'm the in group, you're the out group, and you add to it envy. So in other words, we're not just talking about another out group could, let's say, the elderly or the homeless or the mentally ill. These are other discriminated against groups, but they're benignly discriminated against. They're seen as not as competent, so we just sort of dismiss them. But when a group is seen as prosperous, as doing well, then we become envious. And in times, which I would argue now we are in a time of political or social upheaval, or certainly economic upheaval, but even political or social upheaval, people become, at least unconsciously, fearful about not having resources. And when a group, therefore, is seen as having resources, they experience envious prejudice, which, unlike other forms of prejudice, tends to be handled in more violent ways, in more fearful, virulent ways. So, in other words, I want to eradicate you because you're taking up resources and I want the resources.
Classic illustration is Nazi Germany.
Yes.
Right? Where Hitler rose to power, and a significant pillar of his rise was saying Germany has been beaten down. Whose fault is it? The Jews.
They're prospering, and it was a time of depression, and people were frightened that they couldn't get enough. So it fit with their wish to get rid of whoever was being successful and taking the resources. And that is exactly, from a social psych standpoint, what spurred on the Holocaust.
Mohammed, how about you, from your perspective? Tell me first about your group and what you do.
So I'm from Muslim Community Patron Services. We work with many different organizations, many communities, various religious communities. And something that we've realized is that, especially in today's time, a lot of these are being more reported. People are getting to know the process because of community patrol organizations like ourselves, the Shimra, the Shamram, the Jewish Patrol, the Asian Patrol. What these patrol organizations, what we have taken the initiative of doing is bringing making it super simple for anyone, for all the immigrants. As we know, New York City is a melting pot. Many people do not speak the language. They feel shy or they feel fearful. So we help them through that process. And we've noticed that many people are reporting these hate crimes or hate incidents because they're now getting to understand the process, or there's someone to guide them through it. And I feel that because we live in a time where social media is key in everything, everyone sees someone else's wealth and they want to live that life. Oh, this person's eating well, I want to be eating well. Why is he having, I don't have it? And you start to build this hate within you until sooner or later we start to show it. Just like as we've mentioned, Nazi, what they've done. They've grown jealous and envious of the Jewish brothers, our Jewish cousins, and they've decided to take them out, wipe them out.
Let me come back for a second to the notion of otherness, right? Because we've all touched on that a little bit, and the destructive power of otherness. Talk in terms of just the identities of the victims and how they look different here, Mark.
Yeah, so that's an important question. I just want to mention one other thing, which is that so much of this is perception. Because although the Jewish community has a reputation and there is a reality to the great wealth that Jews have amassed in the United States, particularly in New York City, there are tons of Jews living below the poverty line.
Yes.
And so I'm sure this perception is real. And I've seen interviews where, unfortunately, people are saying they've got it, and there's a small pie, and they're taking our resources.
Right. Well, it's the perception that it's real, but it's also lumping an entire group together. In other words, you're saying, right, there are some Jews that are perhaps socioeconomically doing well, others that are not. But when you talk about prejudice, it's taking a group and saying everybody's like that. They're all like that.
I think ignorance also adds to prejudice. I feel that because of their ignorance, or in general, we fail to see everyone as we just put an image on everyone. We decide to say, okay, because he has it, this person also has it. Because he's African American, he's going to have it like this. Because he's Jewish, he's going to have it like this. Because he's Muslim, he's going to have it like this. We decide to put one image on top of that whole group of people, whether that be by their sex, gender, whether that be by their religion or race or whatever it may be.
What about the role that social media has played in all of this?
We believe the social media information that we are viewing so constantly. And I would add to this that we're in a time in history where there are a lot of populist leaders, right, that have come to the fore. And the dialogue that they use, that is heard on social media and everywhere, trickles down. And the idea that you are entitled to say, these people who are with me are good, people who are not with me are bad, and make it that cut and dry, so there's no nuance, there's no complex. And what do we do with the bad people? We get rid of them. And the attacking language that's being used from leaders who, from a psychoanalytic perspective, right, these are the parents of the country, if you will. We look to them to set a certain tone. And when the tone trickles down to everyone, it really makes it more difficult to use an appropriate moral compass in deciding how empathically we truly want to treat people. And you're hearing a lot of very inflamed dialogue. I think that's going to get worse.
If you think, the foundation of populism is essentially us versus them.
Correct.
Yes. Us is good. Yes. Them can't be.
Correct.
And as a consequence, we need to eject them, so it's just us here. And that the notion of now clearly there were others, the Nazis especially, who were successful without the access to social media, but the playbook seems the same when you look at it, right? The inflammatory comments.
Well, at the time, that was dialogue to large groups of people, but it was a PR
Big rallies. Big rallies.
That's right.
Watch the Nuremberg rallies.
Important part of things.
was a master at. This is why leaders of minority groups have to be vocal, because if all you get on your Facebook feed are certain kinds of, stereotypes that confirm other kinds of impressions you have of other people, and your own leaders, where you go to church, where you go to a mosque or a synagogue, are not speaking up against those perceptions. We have freedom of speech in this country. God bless that we can do that. So everybody's exercising that, but what comes with that is the necessity, therefore, for there to be opposing vocal, voices. And I'm not seeing that enough.
We heard the man involved in the machete attack in Muncie, his family saying he's mentally ill. We've heard that refrain an awful lot when we're talking about these types of attacks. So this is a very big question, but the role of mental illness in anti-Semitism. How do we define it? Maybe even more important, how do we identify it?
Right. I think it's important for people to look at the numbers. So really, when we look at violence in general, which can be propagated by prejudice or other things for that matter, the numbers of people with mental illness that can commit violent acts is basically in the low 20s. It is a small number. I'm not going to say that it's zero because it's not, but...
So just because you're mentally ill doesn't mean you're violent?
Oh, very much the case. In fact, if you're mentally ill, you are far more likely to be a victim of violence than you are to perpetrate violence. So I think that's important to understand. Obviously, someone with mental illness, it can be just as susceptible and maybe at times, depending on the variety of mental illness, more susceptible to taking in the information that we're talking about, that everyone is hearing, the desensitization to I'm good, you're bad, I can get rid of you if I want to, or I can say you should be exterminated. So they're not immune if you have mental illness, but mental illness does not propagate prejudice particularly. It does not propagate a propensity to commit a violent act, in fact. So I think it's important that, for better or for worse, dealing with mental illness will not fix this problem, as is the case for mass violence.
And in some ways, it sounds like a convenient remedy. Well, it's all being caused by mental illness, therefore...
They would like to point to another marginalized group from which they can divide themselves and say, well, that's not me or mine, to another group that we prejudice and stigmatize. That is more comfortable than the reality, which is it's not that.
Let's talk some solutions, all right? Let's start with the notion of community involvement. And Mohammed, let me come to you. Talk about your community involvement and how you think what you all are doing can be utilized to help to hopefully eliminate acts of violence directed at Muslims, at Jews, at any of these target groups.
So a lot of communities have this feeling that Muslims and the Jewish community can never get along for some reason. And what we have done is that when Hanukkah was taking place, we've decided to work with the Jewish patrol organization, Shemra and Shamrim, reached out to them. We wished them happy holidays, and we've patrolled the synagogues. We've also patrolled the churches during the Christmas season. We have 2 different locations, one in Brooklyn and one is also in Park, Queens. And we've made sure that our volunteers were outside, making sure that the community is safe and secure. We know that a lot of our officers are not in the precinct because of the holiday season. Some of them take off, many of them take off. So we made sure that we were there extra, giving till late night so that everyone was safe. And it was very unfortunate that we had to gather together in Brooklyn because of an attack, what took place in 40 minutes from here, and that was very unfortunate that it took place in a rabbi's house. We don't expect that. Something that we are doing as a Muslim community is feeding the homeless. We come back to the city, we feed the homeless, we have the opportunity to gather with people, speak to people. And that's the same thing that we take back when we go on patrol. We make sure that we're talking to everyone, whether they be Muslim, non-Muslim, atheist, whatever the case may be. It gives us the opportunity to have a dialogue between them. And because we're having these dialogues, a lot of people are better understanding our culture, our difference of belief. And it's most likely they will become more accepting of it.
Yeah, let me ask you about this. You know, one of the solutions, and there's not a single solution, but one of the things you're hearing is more police presence. Is there a point where you get too much of a police presence, or is too much not even enough?
I think more of a police presence when there's a clearly identified problem is a good thing. Right. Because really, I think that, frankly, all institutions that have teachable ability, let's say, or statement ability, need to work to contribute. So we're talking about the police, we could be talking about schools, and we should be talking about, of course, the families. Because
I'm going to get to all of those in
really,
a second.
what we're talking about is, right, it's human nature to feel some of these feelings that we're talking about. You don't belong to me, or I envy you. But it's society's duty, if you will, to civilize people and teach them empathy and have them have a moral compass.
Do you both agree the notion of policing, more police presence
I agree.
Can be helpful for it?
It's necessary. We need it. I mean, unfortunately, synagogues, I've gone to Europe many times. You go to a synagogue in Europe, they often can't tell where the synagogue is. They're hidden. And you can figure it out then when you see the 2 or 3 guys with submachine guns in front, and then they ask to see your passport and ask you 10 questions about the prayers to actually affirm that you're Jewish.
Are we close to that?
Yes, so that's
clearly that would provide protection. Is that what we want?
No, I mean, it would be the greatest shame in the United States of America, which honors and celebrates pluralism and equality and tolerance, that we would have to live like that. But that's the way, unfortunately, Jews have had to live for centuries. And we're at a real crossroads. Depending on how we deal with this situation is whether or not it's going to become the new normal.
Let's talk now about the notion of schools and families. The marches have been marvelous and important demonstrations of solidarity. But here's the reality. The people who are marching are not the problem. You know, they're not going to go out there and create difficulties. So somehow we have to get to the people who are not in the marches. Those are the ones we have to get to. Now, I'm not saying that this other is not valuable. It is. Demonstrations of solidarity and deep belief and resilience are important. And in many ways, and I'll go to you with this, Gail, I don't think you come out of the womb with inbred hatred.
You don't, but you can be taught to hate, but you might feel feelings of hate without being taught to hate, to be honest. Because,
what do you mean?
Well, there is a sadistic side to human nature, right? We're all have the potential to be somewhat fascinated, right, by gory things, by disturbing things, by cruel things. It's an interest, let's say, but society teaches us what is okay and what is not okay. So while you could come to hate without being necessarily taught, and you certainly could be taught to hate, and unfortunately many children do hear this rhetoric in their home, and they grow up into people who hate. But moreover, you have to be taught to be empathic, to have a good moral compass. That's the point in parenting. Parents are supposed to say, hey, this is right, this is wrong, and we don't do this, and here's why. And if we do this, we feel bad, and we have to apologize, and those sorts of things. So I think it's important that schools, more and more schools, are having anti-bullying work going on. They are teaching emotional intelligence. They are teaching empathy. But prejudice needs to be part of the curriculum, essentially.
My question is this, and I hope this isn't true, but my question is, and we hear people talking about, and the mayor was talking about getting programs into the schools, middle schools, high schools. And my question is that too late? Have young people already formed so much of who they are, including that notion of who they hate, by the time they get to middle school, by the time they get to high school?
People in my profession would definitely tell you this should start in elementary school, and it should be present at home, and it should be present earlier, because in those early years, a moral compass is forming. And you're right that it's not that your brain is plastic, and you can keep acquiring things, and you can keep evolving, but you're undoing a certain amount by later that's already been done. So earlier is better.
So later you're correcting? Is that it?
Essentially.
But how awesome would it be if in our school system, and by the way, important for it to be in public schools and in private schools,
yes,
that all kids are exposed to leaders, or not even leaders, just members of other faiths and ethnicities, so they can have that image, that positive image of other people. Because if they haven't really met, and we don't spend enough time, even in New York City, we don't spend enough time getting to know each other. I mentioned this earlier. If every kid was required to get to know somebody from a different faith or group, and they grew up with that impression, that could at least fight against some of the images or things that they hear.
I agree. I feel that just like we have career days, possibly have a day where we bring different backgrounds of people, different ethnicity, different religious people, come in and just share who they are and how they feel. This will create a better image in our children's head.
What that does is we're talking about humanizing. Right. And one of the best weapons, I guess I'll say, of prejudice is dehumanizing.
We know we can introduce programs to schools. We can do that. But how do we get to parents? How do we get to the children when they're young and impressionable and malleable and learning these things? How do we get the parents to understand the extraordinary power they have to teach empathy and not hatred?
I mean, I don't mean to sound cynical, but I think we have to start with the law. And I think parents need to know that nobody will get away with a hate crime, with a bias crime. And they need to be afraid to commit these acts, and they need to teach their kids that they will have severe consequences. This new bail law in New York City, which is allowing people who commit hate crimes, as long as they're not ridiculously violent, they get out until their trial. And we've had situations in the last couple of weeks of people who've committed attacks and were let out, and that has to change.
Mohammed?
I feel that what Rabbi Mark said is very important, but also if we can start correcting, as Dr. Gale has mentioned, that start correcting these parents, because as a child we get these perception of the minorities as a certain way to hate towards them. But if the parents would start correcting their hate, catching themselves before committing the mistake, they would be able to teach their children. Many people hate another group of people, minorities, without realizing the fact that they're hating someone until they dehumanize that person. And now this person or this group of people are no longer humans to them. So they don't feel sympathy, they don't feel empathy, they don't feel anything towards them. So one of the best ways would be to first getting parents to learn about hate itself and what it is that they hate. Because oftentimes we hate, but we don't know what it is that we hate, you know? And because we don't know what we might hate, we just spread it all over.
Education, I think, is hugely important. I think most parents would acknowledge that they want to bring up a child who's going to come into a world that we would want to be in. They want a child who will be a good citizen of the world. And I think that basically talking with parents, and whether that's schools talking with parents, whether it's programs like this talking with parents, but being able to talk to parents about how they can best do that. But basically education about these things, because it really starts at home. And even when they go to school, it's still at home. They still come home. And the parents are still going to be the biggest influence, even in the teen years when they think their kids aren't listening at all. They are. And so we really have to educate, I think, parents about what they can be doing, what they should be doing when they go to synagogue or when they go to another church, or how they interact with others and how they think about that, and talk with their children about it.
Well, these are extraordinarily complex issues. They are extraordinarily important issues. And I think having these conversations and having the three of you here and contributing your thoughts have been very helpful and very important. So I want to thank you all. And thanks so much, all of you, for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
And thank all of you for joining us for this special edition of MetroFocus. For more information on Rabbi Wild's organization, Muhammad's Muslim Community Patrol, and Dr. Gail Saltz, make sure you visit us at metrofocus.org. Have a good night.